social media must be there must be some utility to it, some business utility to it.
Yes.
So that seems to be like, is that the way to listen right now? And like, what are you seeing in the market, Christopher?
Yeah, I think the thing when we talk about, there is social media listening where on a one-to-one basis where you're trying to just figure out how to engage through social media, but there's also social media analytics, which is taking a more holistic look of what people are saying across the internet, not just in Facebook and Twitter, but there's thousands of news sites where people are posting comments, there's blogs, there's a lot of sites out there. So making sure that you're mining all of that data, especially if you're in the business of, if you're a company and your marketing becomes really important. But I think the challenge that some of the people in the marketing departments that I talk to on a regular basis, the challenge that they have is finding those examples where you can tie what's happening in social media at a macro level, so rising or falling in sentiment expressed around a particular brand, tying that back to impact on the bottom line, sales, et cetera. I think the example of what happened last early fall, I don't know if you guys saw, but the networks were doing a very carefully looking at the social media discussion around the amount of traffic around the individual shows that were debuting in the fall. And much to their chagrin, they found out that there was a very low correlation between the amount of positive traffic around certain shows and the ratings that those shows actually received. So in that particular case, there wasn't, in that case, that much value that they got from, I mean, you could say that there was value in learning that, driving social media traffic in that case wasn't correlated with ratings. But that's where a lot of companies are really starting to focus in. How do I translate mining all that data on the social media at a macro scale? How do I actually build predictive models that allows me to use that to drive my business? I think we'd all agree that the segmentation of people that are calling in to rave about a product, like Campbell's soup is great, things like that, is a different segmentation of people that are demographic that are actually posting things, comments on social media. But at a very high macro level, the affinity expressed around certain brands and things like that, we've found to be relatively consistent, which we think is pretty interesting. The other thing we find is that for certain issues that crop up, if people are upset around a particular ad that a company ran or whatever issue, we have found in some cases, not all, but in some cases, we get about a 24-hour advance notice on social media before we start to see the uptick in calls in some cases. And that's an example where there could be value in social media, not in terms of giving your organization 24 advance notice around how to deal with something that you're going to start to receive calls, like how to staff up for that in your call center, how to actually make sure everybody's actually saying the right thing so you don't have things that are blowing up. So the important thing to mining all this social media data, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' take on this as well, is to make sure you're doing it in the context of all the information that you're getting through your call center, et cetera, looking at that holistically and trying as rigorously as possible to link that and correlate that. We won't get into whether a correlation is causal or not. That's a whole other subject. But really trying to figure out, how do I link what's going on in social media to the things that actually drive my bottom line in the business?
It's really interesting. I mean, and I'm thinking about this as you made that comment. The notion that there's an incongruity between the bottom line of in the example that you used, TV, with kind of the conversation that's happening in social media. So I have two comments about that. One, I feel like the way that we understand conversations in these social media tools is, we're just scratching the surface, right? So you tend to have two views. You've got the macro view, which is everyone, and then you've got, and that tends to be distorted by the loudest voices in the room. And then you've got kind of the micro view, which is your own personal stream. And between those two, you try to understand kind of how are people really kind of engaging in this conversation. But there's this whole type of conversation in between those two extremes that's totally unexplored, right? So what I'm talking about is not what my friends are talking about and not what everyone's talking about, but what my friends' friends are talking about and what their friends' friends are talking about. And so, it's interesting because we spend so much time thinking about the consumer and how the consumer can get value out of these conversations, and then to reorient ourselves in the position of the business and say, okay, how can the business get value out of this data set is kind of a different challenge. But I think ultimately where the incongruity is, and this is my second point, is that broadcast media looking for a way to fit social conversations or kind of help or find a way for these social conversations to influence their kind of bottom line, it's always going to be incongruous, right? Because those business models are based on a type of broadcast that doesn't fit into the way that people are talking about and sharing content on the social web. And so publishing found out about this 10 years ago, and it's interesting to watch kind of how the business models have changed in the last 10 years, and how advertising is changing in the last 10 years. But ultimately, like, that incongruity is going to be around until a time when things like mass market TV and advertising are less relevant, which is like 10, 15 years, who knows how long. But at some point they'll get their comeuppance.
Yep.